Dear student, I, Dr. Shafali Jain, Assistant Professor, Tirthankar Mahavir University. Today, student, we discuss about the topic of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Introduction to the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility is an economic principle that states that as a person consumes more of good, the utility of satisfaction derived from each additional unit of that could decrease. This concept helps explain consumer behavior and decision making. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that all as equal as consumption increases, the marginal utility derived from each additional unit declines. Marginal utility is the incremental increase in utility that results from the consumption of one additional unit. Utility is an economics term used to represent satisfaction or happiness. It means the law of marginal utility states that all as equal as consumption increases, the marginal utility derived from each additional unit decline. Marginal utility is it means in simple word the law of diminishing marginality means that the more of an item that you use or consume, the less satisfaction you get from each additional utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility says that the marginal utility from each additional units decline as consumption increases. The marginal utility may decrease into negative utility as it may become entirely unfavorable to the consumer another unit of any product. Diminishing marginal utility doesn't apply to money because its utility doesn't decrease and someone gets more of it. Due to diminishing marginal utility, businesses will lower the price of product to match a consumer equilibrium willingness to buy it. To understand to understand how the law of diminishing marginal utility affect both consumer and businessman, it can be helpful. Uh, it is also helpful if other things remaining the same when a person. It means if other things remaining the same when a person takes successive units of a commodity, the marginal utility diminishes constantly. The marginal utility of a commodity diminishes as the consumer get larger quantities of it. Marginal utility it is the change in total utility resulting from one unit's change in the consumption of a commodity per unit of time. Now, assumption. Following are some assumptions of the marginal utility. Uh, I think you have to understood what is the so the law of the marginal utility, the law of diminishing marginal utility causes such a decrease in satisfaction with successive unit consumption. The marginal utility, the diminishing marginal utility law is universally applicable and it applies on all products and services. It was initially proposed by a German economist, H. Gossin. Thus, it is also known as Gossin's first law of consumption. And I think you have to understood what is the meaning of the law of marginal utility. Now, what assumption should we follow to this law? First of all, it assumes that utility can be measured and a consumer can express his satisfaction in quantitative terms such as 1, 2, 3, 2, 3 and consumer consumption of the reasonable quantity. It means as in the before video, I have also discussed about the cardinal utility approach and cardinal utility approach which is given by the Alfred Marshall and he in the cardinal utility approach it this approach is based on the law of diminishing marginal utility. In it we can measure the utility in the numbers terms 1, 2, 3. So This law is based on the quantitative terms. नेक्स्ट है consumption on reasonable quantity. इसमें cardinal measurement of utility. Uh, uh, it assumed जो consumption होना चाहिए, it is assumed that the commodity of the consumed at a reasonable quantity. For example, rather than comparing the of spoonfuls, one should compare the of glasses of juice, not a one spoon. One should, if a thirsty person is given juice of a spoon, if a thirsty person, then each extra increase utility. Therefore, for the law to be true, and proper quantity of the goods is to be consumed. It means uh, जो कंजम्पशन क्वांटिटी होनी चाहिए ये रीजनेबल होनी चाहिए. एक स्पून नहीं होनी चाहिए. ये एक ग्लास या एक रोटी, एक बाइट नहीं होना चाहिए कि एक रोटी का एक बाइट हो, या एक ग्लास में एक स्पून हो, एक चम्मच स्पून हो. ये बल्कि क्या कहते हैं, पूरी रोटी होनी चाहिए या एक ग्लास होना चाहिए, इस टाइप से होना चाहिए. उसके बाद है continuous consumption. It assumed that consumption is continuous process. For instance, if you have a one cup of milk in the morning and another in the evening, then the second cup of milk can provide equal or higher satisfaction when compared of the first. So it should be continue uses. There should be not gap. Next step, monetary measurement of utility. The law of diminishing margin utility assumes that utility can be measured in the monetary terms. It can be measured in the money and utils. तो जो चेंज जो मेजरमेंट होना चाहिए ये मनी के टर्म्स में किया जा सके. नेक्स्ट है नो चेंज इन क्वांटिटी. इट इज एक्सपेक्टेड that the commodity consumed of a constant quantity. If the first cup of milk has no added sugar and chocolates, the second cup of milk with added sugar or chocolate can satisfy you more than the first. So quantity should be same. There should be no change in the quantity. Next is rational consumer. The rational consumer measure the consumer should be rational, and because a rational consumer can compute and evaluate the utility various commodities to maximize overall satisfaction. Next, जैसे MU of money remain constant. To marginal utility, a consumer MU means marginal utility of money. Uh, a consumer has less money to spend on other commodities after paying for the commodity. This process increases the MU of money for the consumer and makes the remaining cash dearer to the then. However, such an increase in MU is ignored. It is assumed that the MU of money is constant, since the MU of a commodity must be measured in monetary terms. Next, independent utilities. All of the commodities a consumer consumes are assumed to be independent. Hence, there is no relationship between the MU of one commodity and the MU of another. Furthermore, it is assumed that the utility of one person is affected by the utility of the another person. Next, fixed income price. It assumed that the consumer's income and price of the goods they want to purchase remain constant. There should be no changes in the prices and the income of the consumer. और और भी जैसे बहुत सी assumptions हो सकती है, जैसे perfect knowledge. It is assumed that the consumer has knowledge of the different goods on which his income can be spent and the utility that he likely to derive from Such consumption it indicates that the customer that the customer has perfect knowledge all of the various choices available to him. It means the goods being consumed are identical. The units are consumed quickly with few breaks in between. Units are not too big or too small, meaning it's a rational quantity. The consumer's taste is constant. Income, income, taste, when the price of the commodity should be constant. There is no change in the price of goods or their substitutes. The units can be measured. The consumers is making rational decision about the consumption. I think you properly understood what is the what is the assumptions of the utility. Now we discuss about the marginal utility because this law is depend on the marginal utility. Marginal utility is added satisfaction that a consumer gets from having one more units of a good or service. The concept of marginal utility is used by the economics to determine how much of an item consumer are willing to purchase. Positive marginal utility occurs when the consumption of an individual of an additional item increases the total utility. On the other hand, negative marginal utility occurs when the consumptions of one more unit decrease the overall utility. It means marginal utility is the added satisfaction of a consumer gets from having one more units of a good or service. The concept of the marginal utility is used by economics to determine how much of an item consumer are willing to purchase. The law of diminishing marginal utility is often used to justify progressive taxation. Margin utility can be positive, zero, or negative. There are there are multiple kinds of margin utility. There are most common three types of margin utility. First of positive, we have to understanding the margin utility. We have to understand what is positive margin utility, zero marginal utility, and negative margin utility. Positive margin utility occurs when having more of an item bring additional happiness. Suppose you like eating a slice of cake, but a second slice would bring you some extra joy. Then then your marginal utility from consuming cake is positive. Now, zero marginal utility is when happens when consuming more of an item bring no extra measure of satisfaction. For example, you might feel fairly full after two slices of cake and wouldn't really feel any better after having a third slice. In this case, your marginal utility from eating cake is zero. Now, what is the negative marginal utility? Negative marginal utility is where you have too much of an item. So, consuming more is actually harmful. For instance, the fourth slice of cake might even make you sick after eating three pieces of cake. The concept of margin utility is developed by the economics to who were attempting to explain the economic reality of price. Uh, which they believed was driven by predicts utility. In the 18th century, economist Adam Smith discussed what is known as paradox of water and diamond. The paradox state that water that water has far less value than diamond, even though water is vital to human life. Now we discuss about the marginal utility. Now we discuss about what is total utility. Total utility is the aggregate amount of satisfaction or fulfillment that a consumer received through the consumption of a specific good or service. Total utility often compared to the marginal utility, which is the satisfaction of a consumer received from consuming one additional units of a good or service. Total utility helps economists understand the demand for goods and service. It means total utility is the aggregate sum of satisfaction or fulfillment of a consumer received through the consumption of goods or services. Economics seek to quantity, utility, and total utility using utils. To best understand total utility, one should understand the law of diminishing margin utility, which states that as more of a single good or service is consumed, additional satisfaction referred to as marginal utility drops. Total utility is a core concept studies when seeking to analyze consumer behavior. In general, economics theories believes that consumer action are usually based on the goal of total utility maximization, which leads to purchasing units perceived to have the greatest utility satisfaction. In economics, utility refers to the satisfaction gained from consuming a good or service. Total utility is usually defined as a quantitative sum of satisfaction or happiness obtained from consuming multiple units of a particular goods or service. Total utility is often studied alongside rational choice theory and the law of diminishing marginal utility. Choice theory says that consumers seek to maximize their utility with each unit of consumption. Consumer theory and demand theory suggest that consumer action are driven towards utility maximization by attempting to acquire the most satisfaction possible in the most affordable way. In general, classical economics theory showed that most consumer wants to get the highest possible level of utility per units for the money they spend. Total utility is usually measured in relative units called utils, which I have also studied before. When measuring total utility, analysis can span from one unit for consumption to multiple units. For example, a cookie provides a level of utility as determined by its singular consumption, while a bag of cookies may provide total utility over the course of time. It takes a completely consume all the cookies in the bag. So now, this law of diminishing margin utility we understood with the help of the diagram. In this diagram, you can see that the use of the first that a person consume six oranges. The first oranges consumed gives to him 12 12 utils, 12 utils. It and first on number of the first unit, the consumer get 12 utils and the marginal utility and 12 and total utility is also 12. The second and the third orange consumed decreases the marginal utility with each additional orange consumed. Second, eight. Third, he gets six utils. Fourth way, he gets four utils. Uh, this is and with additional and marginal utility with each additional orange consumed. This is because their desire to consume more orange decreases with each successive units of uh, orange consumed. And in the fifth units of or consumed the orange, he gets zero margin utility, and here the total utility become maximum. And after that, 1 to 4, uh, if 1 to 4 units, the consumer get positive marginal utility. And fifth, on the fifth unit, the consume of the orange, the consumer get zero marginal utility. And the sixth unit consume of the marginal utility, the sixth unit of consume the orange gets him negative marginal utility, and the total utility also diminishing. With the help of this diagram, you can also see that on the x-axis, the number of orange, and the y-axis, the utility. And orange, the number of orange 6, and utility 0 to 28. And with the the total utility from the consumption of the uh, first orange is 12 utils, which keeps on the increasing until the person reaches their satiety point. It is this the fifth units of orange consumed. This is the satiety point. On the other hand, margin utility from the consumption of each additional orange keeps on diminishing upon the uh, consumption of the sixth uh, orange. The person has gone over the limit, and the marginal utility becomes negative, which result in a decrease in the total utility. Here is a diagram represent based on the schedule. You can see that on the sixth unit consume the orange, the consumer gets -2 margin utility, and the total utility also diminishing, and it will become 28 from 30. I think you have to totally understood the diagram. Uh, I have also described what is the positive margin utility. Positive margin utility refers to the highest amount of the margin utility derived from the consumption of a commodity, and this phenomena occurs when the consumption of more additional satisfaction of the consumer. For example, in this schedule, you can see that 1 to 4 consume 1 to 4 units of orange. The consumer gets positive marginal utility. Zero marginal utility refers to the marginal utility that occurs when the consumer has reached their satiety point. In this diagram, you can see the use of the fifth unit. The consumer uh, the consumer got in his satiety point. It is in this point the total utility become maximum utility and the highest utility. And this that occurs when the consumer has reached their satiety point. The phenomena occurs when the consumption of additional commodity units bring no extra satisfaction to the consumer. And negative margin utility refers to the margin utility that diminishing after consuming successive commodity units even after the satiety point. This phenomena occurs when the consumer consumes additional units of a commodity, resulting in negative margin utility from the consumption of each successive unit of commodity. For example, in this schedule and diagram, you can see when the consumer consumed the 6 unit of orange, he get -2 margin utility, and total utility also diminishing. It become 28. So I think you have properly understood what is the marginal utility, what is the total utility, and with the help of the diagram, you can also understood what is the law of diminishing margin utility. Now we also read about the importance of the law of diminishing margin utility. First of all, helps to utilize resources economically. It means when the consumer purchases more units of commodity, his marginal utility decreases due to this behavior, the consumer cuts his expenditure on that commodity. Next is it has practical application. This law has a practical application in the field of public finance, as the principle of taxation is based on this law. Ways to other economic laws. The law of diminishing marginal utility is the base for other economics law like the law of demand, elasticity of demand, consumer surplus, and law of substitutions, etc. Next, theory of value is based on this law. The theory of value is based on the law of diminishing utility. The value of a commodity falls with an increase in the supply of that commodity. This forms the basic for determining prices. Next, basis for diamond water paradox. I have also explained about it. Uh, uh, Adam Smith explained the famous diamond water paradox with the help of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Diamond is relatively less in supply, so diamond has high margin utility and high price. A water is representably plenty in surplus. It possesses low marginal utility and has low price through its total utility is very high. This is why water has low price when compared to diamond. Through water is more useful than diamond. Next, it is basis for socialist plea. The law of diminishing utility is basis for the socialist plea for an equitable distribution of wealth. The marginal utility of money of the rich is low, so it is good that the government should acquire surplus wealth and distribute the same to the poor who have high margin utility for money by imposing direct taxes. Above all the practical benefits of studying the law of diminishing margin utility. Today, student, I hope you have to properly understood what is the law of diminishing margin utility, what is the margin utility, how many types of the margin utility, what is the total utility. With the help of the schedule and diagram, you have also properly understood what is the law of diminishing margin utility. You also understood what is the importance of marginal law of diminishing margin utility. Thank you, students. Thank you very much.